My name is Detective Marcus Rodriguez, and I've been working homicide for the LAPD for 15 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen every kind of evil this city had to offer. Gang violence, domestic murders, drug-related killings. I'd investigated them all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the case that would consume my life for the next 6 months and nearly destroy everything I believed about justice and the thin blue line. It started on a cold Tuesday morning in March, when Captain Morrison called me into his office. The look on his face told me this wasn't going to be a routine briefing. "Rodriguez, we've got a problem," he said, sliding a manila folder across his desk. A big one. Inside that folder were crime scene photos that would haunt my dreams for years to come. The first victim was Sarah Chen, 26 years old, found strangled in an alley behind a downtown restaurant. The rope marks around her neck were unlike anything I'd seen before. Intricate, almost artistic in their precision. "This is the third one in 2 weeks," Morrison continued. "Same MO, same rope pattern, same type of victim. The media's starting to catch wind of this, and the mayor's breathing down my neck for answers." I studied the photos carefully, noting the meticulous way the rope had been tied. This wasn't a crime of passion or a robbery gone wrong. This was the work of someone who took pleasure in the act. Someone who had probably been fantasizing about this for years, before finally acting on those dark impulses. Asterisk spent the next week diving deep into the case files, working with FBI profiler Dr. Amanda Foster to build a psychological profile of our killer. The victims were all young women between the ages of 24 and 30, all professionals working in downtown Los Angeles. They had no connection to each other that we could find. Different jobs, different social circles, different neighborhoods, but they all shared certain physical characteristics: long dark hair, petite build, and they all worked late hours. "He's hunting," Dr. Foster explained during one of our sessions. "These aren't random killings. He's selecting his victims based on specific criteria, probably stalking them for weeks before making his move." The rope pattern was our biggest clue. It was a complex, not called a strangler's noose, historically used in maritime applications, but requiring significant skill to tie properly. Your killer either has a background in sailing, rock climbing, or rope manufacturing, Foster continued. This level of precision doesn't happen by accident. He's practiced this hundreds of times. I made a list of every rope manufacturer, sailing, club, and climbing gym in the Los Angeles area. It was going to be a long investigation, but we finally had a direction to pursue. What I didn't know was that our killer was already 3 steps ahead of us, watching our every move and planning his next strike. Asterisk Maria Gonzalez was found on a Thursday morning by a homeless man searching through dumpsters for recyclables. She was 28 years old, worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm, and had been missing for 3 days. The rope pattern was identical to the previous victims, but this time our killer had left something new at the scene: a small piece of paper tucked into the victim's jacket pocket. On it was written a single word: justice. I stared at that note for hours, trying to understand what it meant. Was our killer trying to communicate with us? Did he think he was some kind of vigilante, dispensing his own twisted version of justice? Dr. Foster believed the note was significant. "He's escalating," she warned. "The fact that he's now leaving messages suggests he wants recognition for his work. He's proud of what he's doing and wants us to understand his motivation." I had the note analyzed for fingerprints, DNA, handwriting samples, anything that might give us a lead. The paper was common copy paper, available at any office supply store. The ink was from a standard ballpoint pen. The handwriting was neat, controlled, suggesting someone with education and patience. But it was the word itself that bothered me most: justice. What kind of justice was he talking about? What had these women done to deserve death? Asterisk, I started digging deeper into the victims' backgrounds, looking for any connection that might explain why they had been targeted. Sarah Chen worked at a non-profit organization that helped immigrants navigate the legal system. Maria Gonzalez was a paralegal who specialized in domestic violence cases. Jennifer Walsh, the second victim, had been an accountant for a company that provided financial services to low-income families. On the surface, these women were pillars of their community, helping people who needed it most. But as I dug deeper, I started finding inconsistencies. Sarah Chen had been under investigation by her nonprofits board for allegedly skimming money from donation funds. Maria Gonzalez had been accused by a former client of taking bribes to influence case outcomes. Jennifer Walsh's company was being audited for possible embezzlement. None of these allegations had been proven, and in Jennifer's case, the audit had cleared her of any wrongdoing. But the pattern was troubling. Was our killer targeting these women because he believed they were corrupt? Was he some kind of vigilante who saw himself as cleaning up the city? I shared my findings with Dr. Foster, who nodded grimly. "It fits the profile," she said. "He sees himself as a moral crusader, eliminating people he perceives as corrupt or dishonest. In his mind, he's not a killer, he's an agent of justice." My investigation into rope manufacturers led me to Pacific Rope Manufacturing, a mid-company located in the industrial district of Los Angeles. The company specialized in high-quality ropes for maritime and industrial applications, exactly the type that would be needed to create the complex knots found at our crime scenes. I interviewed the manager, Robert Stevens, who was cooperative, but nervous. "We keep detailed records of all our sales," he assured me, pulling out thick ledgers filled with customer information. "But we sell to hundreds of clients, boat dealers, construction companies, climbing gyms, even individual customers who walk in off the street." I spent hours going through those records, looking for any pattern or suspicious purchases. Most of the sales were to legitimate businesses with long-standing accounts. But there were several cash purchases in the past 6 months that caught my attention. Small quantities of the specific type of rope used in the murders, bought by individuals who paid cash and provided minimal identification. "Do you have security cameras?" I asked Stevens. He nodded and led me to a small office where months of security footage were stored on digital drives. It would take days to review it all, but I was determined to find our killer's face among those grainy images. What I found instead was something far more disturbing. As I reviewed the security footage from Pacific Rope Manufacturing, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In several of the recordings, I could see a man in the background who looked familiar. It took me a moment to place him, but when I did, my heart started racing. It was Thomas Mitchell, a night shift supervisor at the company who had access to all areas of the facility and detailed knowledge of their inventory. But that wasn't what made him familiar. I had seen his face before, in a different context entirely. Mitchell had been arrested 3 years earlier for stalking a female coworker. The charges had been dropped when the victim decided not to testify, but his psychological evaluation from that case was still in our files. The profile described him as having antisocial tendencies, difficulty forming relationships, and an obsession with control and dominance. He fit our killer's profile perfectly. I ran a background check and discovered that Mitchell lived alone, in a small apartment, just 10 minutes from where the first victim had been found. He had no solid alibi for any of the murder dates, and his work schedule at the rope factory would have given him access to the murder weapon. But as I dug deeper into his background, I found something that didn't fit. Mitchell wasn't particularly intelligent or educated. The psychological profile suggested our killer was highly organized and methodical, someone with above-average intelligence who could plan complex crimes and stay ahead of police investigation. Mitchell seemed more like a follower than a leader, someone who might assist in the crimes but probably wasn't the mastermind behind them. Despite my reservations about Mitchell being the primary suspect, I couldn't ignore the evidence. I set up surveillance on his apartment and began tracking his movements. For 2 weeks, I watched him follow the same routine: work at the rope factory from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., sleep during the day, and spend his evenings at a small bar near his apartment. He seemed like a lonely, pathetic man rather than a calculating serial killer. But on the night of April 15th, everything changed. Instead of going to work, Mitchell drove to the industrial district and parked outside an abandoned warehouse. I followed at a distance, watching as he entered the building carrying a large duffel bag. This was it. This had to be where he was planning his next attack. I called for backup, but dispatch informed me that all units were tied up with a major accident on the freeway. I would have to wait at least 30 minutes for assistance. 30 minutes that could mean the difference between life and death for his next victim. I made the decision that would change everything. I decided to go in alone. As I approached the warehouse, my service weapon drawn, and my heart pounding, I had no idea that I was walking into a trap that had been months in the making. The real killer had been watching me just as carefully as I had been watching Mitchell, and tonight was the night he planned to eliminate the one threat to his operation: me. The warehouse was a maze of abandoned machinery and storage containers, perfect for hiding a killer's activities. As I moved through the shadows, using my flashlight sparingly to avoid detection, I could smell something that made my stomach turn: the unmistakable odor of decomposition. This wasn't just where Mitchell planned his crimes, this was where he brought his victims. I followed the smell deeper into the building, my weapon ready and my senses on high alert. What I found in the back corner of the warehouse was a makeshift torture chamber that would have made the most hardened detective sick. Ropes hung from the ceiling like macabre decorations, and a table in the center of the room was stained with what I didn't want to think about. But it was the wall that truly horrified me. Dozens of photographs were pinned to a large board. Surveillance shots of women going about their daily lives, completely unaware they were being watched by a predator. Some of the faces I recognized as our victims, but there were many others I didn't know. How many more women had this monster killed? How many more families were out there, wondering what had happened to their daughters, sisters, wives? I heard footsteps on the metal stairs leading to the second floor, and realized Mitchell was somewhere above me. It was time to end this nightmare, once and for all. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing through the empty warehouse, despite my efforts to move quietly. The second floor was even more disturbing than the first. It was set up like a twisted apartment, complete with a bed, a small kitchen area, and what looked like a shrine dedicated to his victims. Personal items that must have been taken from the crime scenes were displayed like trophies: jewelry, driver's licenses, even locks of hair preserved in small glass vials. In the center of it all stood Thomas Mitchell, his back to me, as he worked on something I couldn't see. "LAPD, put your hands where I can see them, and turn around slowly," I shouted, my weapon trained on his center mass. He turned around with deliberate slowness, and when I saw his face, I was struck by how ordinary he looked. This wasn't the face of a monster. It was the face of a man who could blend into any crowd, who could sit next to you on a bus, or serve you coffee at a restaurant without raising any suspicion. "Detective Marcus Rodriguez," he said calmly, as if we were meeting for coffee instead of in a killer's lair. "I've been expecting you." The fact that he knew my name sent chills down my spine. How long had this psychopath been watching me? How much did he know about my life, my family, my investigation? "You're under arrest for the murders of Sarah Chen, Maria Gonzalez, Jennifer Walsh, and Rebecca Martinez," I said, referring to the fourth victim whose body had been found just days earlier. Mitchell smiled, and it was the most unsettling expression I had ever seen. "Detective, you're really not giving me enough credit. Asterisk how many?" I demanded, keeping my weapon steady despite the tremor I could feel starting in my hands. Mitchell gestured toward a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. "Everything you need is right there, detective." Names, dates, locations, methods. I've been very thorough in my record keeping. As I moved toward the cabinet, keeping my gun trained on him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with this scenario. Serial killers don't just surrender. They don't confess without trying to negotiate or escape. They certainly don't keep detailed records of their crimes in easily accessible filing cabinets. Why? I asked as I opened the first drawer. Why did you kill them? Mitchell's smile widened. Because someone had to. Because the system failed. Because justice isn't blind, it's corrupt, bought and paid for by people who think they're above the law. Inside the filing cabinet were dozens of folders, each one containing detailed information about a different victim. Photos, personal details, work schedules, daily routines, financial records, even psychological profiles. This monster had studied these women like a scientist studying lab rats. But as I flipped through the files, something caught my attention that made my blood run cold. The handwriting wasn't consistent. There were at least 3 different styles, maybe 4. Some of the psychological profiles were written in clinical language that suggested formal training. Some of the surveillance photos had timestamps that showed they were taken simultaneously from different locations. You didn't work alone? I said, looking up at Mitchell. His smile never wavered. Very observant, detective. But you're only seeing a small part of a much larger picture. Asterisk. Before I could ask Mitchell what he meant, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. My backup was finally arriving, but instead of feeling relieved, I felt a growing sense of dread. Mitchell looked at his watch and nodded, as if confirming something he had been expecting. Right on schedule, he murmured. Schedule for what? I demanded, but he just continued smiling that same unsettling smile. The warehouse filled with the sound of heavy boots as multiple officers stormed the building. Up here, I called out, never taking my eyes off Mitchell. Within minutes, the room was full of cops, their weapons drawn and trained on our suspect. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was the first to reach us, followed by Detective Robert Williams, my partner for the past 3 years. Outstanding work, Rodriguez, Williams said, but something in his tone seemed off. Let's get this piece of garbage out of here and close this case. As 2 officers moved to cuff Mitchell, he spoke again, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Detective Rodriguez, before we go, there's something you should know about your colleagues. I looked around at the faces of my fellow officers, people I had worked with for years, people I trusted with my life. What are you talking about? Mitchell's smile grew even wider. Ask Lieutenant Chen about her investment portfolio. Ask Detective Williams about his moonlighting job. Ask Officer Martinez about his gambling debts. The room fell silent, except for the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. Asterisk, Lieutenant Chen's face had gone from its normal color to ashen gray. He's lying, Rodriguez. He's trying to manipulate us, create doubt and confusion. It's what these psychopaths do. They try to turn us against each other. But I could see the sweat beading on her forehead, the way her hand trembled slightly as she holstered her weapon. Detective Williams was avoiding eye contact, and Officer Martinez was staring at the floor like it held the secrets of the universe. What investment? I pressed, my weapon still trained on Mitchell, but my attention now divided among the people in the room. Mitchell laughed, a sound that echoed off the warehouse walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Lieutenant Chen bought stock in Pacific Rope Manufacturing the day before the first murder. Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? Detective Williams has been working security for several companies that were being investigated by the victims, and Officer Martinez owes money to some very dangerous people who would do anything to make their problems disappear. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. Pacific Rope Manufacturing, that was where Mitchell worked, where the murder weapons came from. The companies being investigated by the victims, that could explain how the killer knew so much about their personal lives and schedules. And Martinez's gambling debts, that provided motive for corruption. This is insane, Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're going to believe a serial killer over your own colleagues. But I was remembering things now. Details that hadn't seemed important at the time, but now took on sinister significance. How certain leads had gone cold, just when we were getting close to a breakthrough. How evidence had mysteriously disappeared from the lockup, only to be found days later in the wrong location. How someone always seemed to know our next move before we made it, allowing the killer to stay one step ahead of our investigation. How witnesses had suddenly changed their stories, or refused to cooperate after initially being helpful. The rope evidence, I said slowly, pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Williams, you volunteered to handle all the rope evidence. You said you had experience with maritime knots from your time in the Navy. Williams finally looked up, and I could see something in his eyes that I had never noticed before. A coldness that seemed completely at odds with the man I thought I knew. You always were too smart for your own good, Marcus, he said quietly. The other officers in the room were frozen, unsure who to point their weapons at or who to trust. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I realized that I might be the only honest cop in the room. How long? I asked Williams. How long have you been involved in this? Williams laughed bitterly. Involved? Marcus, I didn't get involved in this. I created it. Mitchell here is just a foot soldier, a useful idiot who thinks he's fighting for justice. The real operation is much bigger than one disturbed man with a rope fetish. My mind was reeling. My partner, a man I had trusted with my life countless times, was not just involved in the murders, he was the mastermind behind them. But why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why did you do it? These women were innocent. Williams shook his head, and for a moment, I saw something that might have been genuine emotion cross his face. Innocent. Marcus, you didn't dig deep enough. Sarah Chen wasn't just skimming money from her nonprofit, she was selling information about undocumented immigrants to ICE agents who were paying her for deportation targets. Maria Gonzalez wasn't just taking bribes, she was helping abusive husbands track down their wives who were trying to escape. Jennifer Walsh wasn't just embezzling, she was laundering money for drug dealers and human traffickers. I felt sick to my stomach. If what Williams was saying was true, then these women weren't the innocent victims I had believed them to be. But that didn't justify murder. Even if that's true, I said, you don't have the right to play judge, jury, and executioner. We have a legal system for a reason. Williams laughed again, but this time there was no humor in it. The legal system, Marcus, the legal system is what allowed these people to operate in the first place. Sarah Chen had been reported to her supervisors multiple times, but nothing was done because she brought in too much donation money. Maria Gonzalez had complaints filed against her with the state bar, but they were dismissed because she had connections in the right places. Jennifer Walsh's company was being investigated by the FBI, but the case was dropped when someone higher up decided it wasn't worth pursuing. The web of corruption was deeper than I had imagined, reaching into every level of law enforcement and the justice system. That's when my phone rang. The sound cut through the tension in the room like a gunshot. I looked at the caller ID. It was blocked, showing only unknown number. Don't answer it, Chen said quickly, too quickly. Mitchell's smile grew even wider, if that was possible. Oh, but you should, detective. This is the call you've been waiting for your entire career. Against every instinct screaming at me to ignore the phone, I answered. Rodriguez. The voice on the other end was electronically distorted, but the words were crystal clear. Detective Rodriguez, you need to listen very carefully. Thomas Mitchell is not the Midnight Strangler. He's been working for us, but he's not the killer. Detective Williams is the one who's been murdering these women, and he's not working alone. The corruption goes all the way to the top of your department. I looked around the room at the faces of my colleagues, my mind racing to process what I was hearing. Who is this? I demanded. Someone who's been watching this operation from the beginning. Someone who knows that you're in grave danger right now. Williams isn't planning to arrest Mitchell. He's planning to kill both of you to protect the operation. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. But as I looked up, I saw that Williams had drawn his weapon, and it wasn't pointed at Mitchell anymore. It was pointed directly at me. I'm sorry it has to end this way. Marcus, Williams said, his voice filled with what sounded like genuine regret. You were a good cop, one of the best I've ever worked with. But you couldn't leave well enough alone. The other officers in the room were looking back and forth between us, confusion and fear written on their faces. Williams, what the hell are you doing? Lieutenant Chen demanded, but I noticed she wasn't drawing her weapon to defend me. I'm cleaning up a mess, Williams replied. Marcus has figured out too much. He knows about the operation, about the network, about how deep this goes. I can't let him walk out of here. Mitchell was watching the scene unfold with obvious amusement. Tell him about the others, Detective Williams. Tell him about all the good work we've been doing. Williams nodded slowly. The women we killed weren't innocent, Marcus. They were parasites, feeding off the misery of others while hiding behind legitimate businesses and organizations. We've eliminated 17 of them over the past 2 years, and the city is a better place because of it. 17. The number hit me like a physical blow. I had only known about 7 victims. There were 10 more families out there who didn't even know their loved ones had been murdered. You're insane, I said, but Williams shook his head. I'm practical. The legal system failed to stop these people, so we created our own system. A more efficient system, a system that actually works. Who else is involved? I asked, stalling for time while I tried to figure out how to get out of this situation alive. Williams smiled, and for a moment, he looked almost proud. You'd be surprised how many people in law enforcement share our philosophy, Marcus. Judges who are tired of watching criminals walk free on technicalities. Prosecutors who are frustrated by plea bargains that let murderers serve 5 years for taking a life. Police officers who are sick of arresting the same people over and over again, only to see them back on the streets within hours. He gestured toward Lieutenant Chen. Sarah here has been invaluable in helping us identify targets and cover our tracks. Her position gives her access to files and evidence that we never could have obtained otherwise. Chen finally spoke up, but instead of denying Williams' accusations, she defended them. These people were destroying lives. Marcus. Sarah Chen alone was responsible for dozens of deportations that separated families and sent people back to countries where they faced torture and death. We saved more lives by killing her than the legal system ever would have by prosecuting her. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were people I had worked with for years, people I had considered friends and colleagues. How had I missed the signs that they were part of a vigilante murder network? And Martinez? I asked, looking at the young officer who was still staring at the floor. What's his role in all this? Williams chuckled. Martinez doesn't know anything about the murders. His gambling debts just make him useful for other things, planting evidence, losing paperwork, making sure certain cases get assigned to the right detectives. He thinks he's just helping us bend a few rules to catch bad guys. But you're not the one in charge, are you? I said, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Someone else is running this operation. Someone with more power, more resources, more connections. William's smile faltered for the first time. What makes you say that? Because you're not smart enough to plan something this complex, I said bluntly. You're a good detective, Williams, but you're not a mastermind. Someone else is pulling the strings, and you're just another foot soldier, just like Mitchell. The room fell silent, and I could see that my words had hit their mark. William's face was flushed with anger, but there was also something else there, fear. He was afraid of whoever was really in charge of this operation. Tell me who it is, I pressed. Tell me who's really running this network. Before Williams could answer, Mitchell spoke up. Why don't you ask Captain Morrison, Detective Rodriguez? I'm sure he'd be very interested to know how close you've come to uncovering his little project. My blood turned to ice. Captain Morrison, my commanding officer, the man who had assigned me to this case in the first place. The man who had access to every detail of our investigation, who knew every move we were planning before we made it. The man who could have easily manipulated the evidence and the witness statements to keep us chasing shadows while the real killers operated with impunity. Morrison's been running this operation for 3 years, Mitchell continued, clearly, enjoying the shock on my face. He recruits carefully, cops who are disillusioned with the system, judges who are tired of watching criminals walk free, prosecutors who want to see real justice done. He provides them with targets, resources, and protection from investigation. How many? I asked, my voice barely audible. How many people are involved in this network? Mitchell shrugged. Dozens, maybe hundreds. It's not just Los Angeles, detective. There are cells operating in cities across the country. New York, Chicago, Miami, Seattle. All of them following the same model: identify corrupt individuals who are protected by the legal system, eliminate them quietly, and cover up the evidence. The scope of what he was describing was staggering. A nationwide network of law enforcement officers, judges, and prosecutors who had decided to take justice into their own hands. A shadow organization operating within the very institutions that were supposed to protect society from vigilante violence. The phone call, I said suddenly. Who made the phone call that warned me? Williams and Mitchell exchanged glances, and I could see that this was something they hadn't expected. That's a very good question, Williams said slowly. Someone's been feeding information to outside parties. Someone within the network has turned traitor. The implication was clear. There was a faction within this vigilante organization that was working against it, possibly trying to expose the entire operation. But who, and why, had they chosen to warn me specifically? Maybe it's someone who still believes in the real justice system, I suggested. Maybe it's someone who realizes that what you're doing is wrong, no matter how you try to justify it. Williams shook his head. Or maybe it's someone who wants to take control of the operation for themselves. Power corrupts, Marcus, even among those who start with good intentions. The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Williams still had his gun pointed at me, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He was waiting for orders, but from whom? Was Morrison on his way to the warehouse? Were there other members of the network positioned outside, ready to eliminate anyone who tried to leave? What's the plan here, Williams? I asked. You kill me. You kill Mitchell to tie up loose ends. And then what? You think this is all going to go away? Williams was sweating now, and I could see that he hadn't thought this through completely. The operation will continue, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. There are bigger things at stake here than one detective who couldn't mind his own business. What about the other officers in this room? I pressed. Are you going to kill all of them too? How many people have to die to protect your secret? Lieutenant Chen spoke up for the first time in several minutes. Marcus, you don't understand what we're dealing with here. The people we've eliminated weren't just criminals. They were part of larger networks of corruption that reach into every level of government. We're not just killing individuals. We're dismantling entire criminal enterprises. By becoming criminals yourselves, I shot back. By abandoning everything we swore to protect when we put on these badges. The sound of sirens was getting closer, and I realized that more police units were arriving at the scene. But were they coming to help me, or were they part of the network? How deep did this conspiracy go? How many of my colleagues were involved in this vigilante organization? The warehouse filled with the sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside, followed by the heavy footsteps of what sounded like a SWAT team entering the building. Rodriguez. Status report, came a voice from below. I recognized it as Sergeant Thompson, a veteran officer who had been with the department for over 20 years. Up here, I called back, but Williams quickly raised his hand to silence me. Not another word, he hissed. Thompson's one of ours. My heart sank. If Thompson was part of the network, then the arriving officers weren't coming to rescue me. They were coming to ensure that I never left this warehouse alive. Within minutes, the room was filled with heavily armed officers, all of them pointing their weapons in my direction. Detective Rodriguez, Thompson said, as he entered the room, you're under arrest for interfering with an ongoing federal investigation. Federal investigation, I said, confused. What federal investigation? Thompson smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. The investigation into the corruption network that these women were part of. You see, detective, what you've stumbled into isn't a vigilante operation. It's a sanctioned federal task force designed to eliminate threats to national security. I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole. Nothing was as it seemed. The murders I had been investigating weren't the work of a serial killer or even a vigilante network. They were government-sanctioned assassinations carried out under the guise of law enforcement. You're lying, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure. In the post-9/11's world, the government had been given unprecedented powers to combat terrorism and organized crime. Was it possible that those powers had been expanded to include the elimination of domestic threats? Thompson pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were official-looking documents bearing the seals of various federal agencies, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, even the CIA. Operation Clean Sweep, Thompson explained. A joint task force designed to eliminate individuals who pose a threat to national security, but who cannot be prosecuted through normal legal channels due to their connections, their resources, or the classified nature of their crimes. I scanned the documents, looking for any sign that they were forgeries, but they looked authentic, complete with official signatures and security clearances. Sarah Chen wasn't just selling information about undocumented immigrants, Thompson continued. She was providing intelligence to foreign agents about the identities and locations of federal witnesses and protection programs. Maria Gonzalez wasn't just helping abusive husbands. She was facilitating the movement of suspected terrorists across state lines by manipulating legal documents. Jennifer Walsh wasn't just laundering money for drug dealers. She was financing operations for international criminal organizations with ties to hostile foreign governments. If what Thompson was saying was true, then these women weren't just corrupt individuals. They were traitors who posed a genuine threat to national security. But that still didn't justify murder. Even if all of that is true, I said, there are legal ways to deal with these threats. Federal courts, military tribunals, deportation proceedings. You don't just execute people without due process. Thompson shook his head. Due process is a luxury we can't afford when dealing with threats of this magnitude. These people had connections that reached into the highest levels of government. Prosecuting them through normal channels would have exposed ongoing operations, compromised federal agents, and alerted other members of their networks. I found myself facing an impossible choice. If Thompson was telling the truth, then the people I had been investigating as murder victims were actually traitors who deserved to be stopped by any means necessary. But if he was lying, then I was looking at a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement, and possibly the federal government itself. Prove it, I said finally. If these women were really threats to national security, then you should have evidence. Show me the intelligence reports, the surveillance footage, the intercepted communications. Thompson smiled and nodded to one of the other officers, who handed him a tablet computer. Sarah Chen, he said, pulling up a video file. Recorded 3 weeks before her death, meeting with a known foreign intelligence operative in a downtown coffee shop. The video showed a woman who looked like Sarah Chen sitting across from a man in a business suit. They appeared to be having a normal conversation, but Thompson claimed that lip-reading experts had determined they were discussing the identities of federal witnesses. Maria Gonzalez, Thompson continued, pulling up another file. Photographed accepting a briefcase full of cash from a suspected terrorist financier. Again, the images looked like they could be innocent business meetings, but Thompson's interpretation painted them as evidence of treason. And Jennifer Walsh, he said, showing me financial records that allegedly showed large cash deposits into offshore accounts, receiving payments for services rendered to international criminal organizations. The evidence was compelling, but something about it felt wrong. It was too neat, too convenient. In my experience, real intelligence operations were messy, complicated, affairs with lots of ambiguous evidence and unclear motivations. This looked more like a carefully constructed narrative designed to justify actions that had already been taken. The phone call, I said suddenly. Someone called to warn me about Williams. If this is really a sanctioned federal operation, then who would want to expose it? Thompson's expression darkened. That's what we're trying to figure out. Someone within the operation has gone rogue, possibly selling information to foreign intelligence services or criminal organizations. That's why it's so important that we contain this situation quickly and quietly. But I was beginning to suspect that the mysterious phone call hadn't come from a traitor within the organization. It had come from someone who was trying to expose a conspiracy. Someone who knew that innocent people were being murdered under the guise of national security. What if you're wrong? I asked. What if these women really were innocent, and someone within your organization is using the cover of national security to settle personal scores or eliminate people for other reasons? Thompson's smile faded. That's not possible. Every target is carefully vetted through multiple intelligence agencies. There are safeguards in place to prevent exactly that kind of abuse. Safeguards like what? I pressed. Who reviews the intelligence? Who makes the final decision to eliminate a target? Who provides oversight to ensure that innocent people aren't being killed? For the first time, Thompson seemed uncertain. That information is classified above your security level. Detective, you'll have to trust that the proper authorities are handling these matters appropriately. But trust was the one thing I couldn't afford to give. Too many people had lied to me. Too many of my colleagues had turned out to be something other than what they seemed. If I was going to get out of this situation alive, I needed to find out who had made that phone call and why they had chosen to warn me. Asterisk. While Thompson and the other officers were focused on explaining their operation to me, I noticed that Mitchell had been quietly working on something behind them. He caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod toward a window on the far side of the room. I realized he was planning an escape, and for some reason, he wanted me to come with him. It didn't make sense. If Mitchell was really part of this federal operation, why would he want to help me escape? Unless he wasn't part of it at all. Unless he was exactly what he had appeared to be from the beginning. A disturbed individual who had been manipulated into believing he was part of something larger and more important than it really was. Detective Rodriguez, Thompson was saying, we're prepared to offer you a position within Operation Clean Sweep. Your investigative skills would be valuable to our mission, and your knowledge of this case makes you a security risk if you remain outside the operation. It was an ultimatum, disguised as an offer. Join them or die. But I had spent 15 years as a police officer because I believed in justice. Real justice, not the perverted version these people were offering. I need time to think about it, I said, hoping to buy myself a few more minutes to figure out an escape plan. Thompson nodded. Of course, it's a big decision, but I'm afraid we can't give you very long. This operation depends on secrecy, and every minute you remain outside our control increases the risk of exposure. That's when Mitchell made his move. He had been slowly working his way toward a control panel on the wall, and suddenly the lights went out, plunging the room into complete darkness. In the confusion that followed, I heard gunshots, shouting, and the sound of breaking glass. Someone grabbed my arm and pulled me toward what I hoped was the window Mitchell had indicated. Asterisk. We crashed through the window in a shower of glass and fell onto a fire escape that I hadn't even known was there. Mitchell was ahead of me, moving with surprising agility for someone who had been portrayed as a clumsy foot soldier. "This way," he shouted over the sound of officers pouring out of the warehouse behind us. We climbed down the fire escape and ran through the maze of alleys that surrounded the industrial district. Behind us, I could hear dogs barking and helicopters starting up. They were pulling out all the stops to find us. "Why are you helping me?" I shouted to Mitchell as we ran. "Because I'm not who they think I am," he replied, "and neither are you." We reached a drainage tunnel that led under the city streets. Mitchell seemed to know exactly where he was going, as if he had planned this escape route long before tonight. As we crawled through the tunnel, he began to explain. "My name isn't Thomas Mitchell," he said. "It's Agent David Chen, FBI. I've been undercover in this operation for 8 months, trying to gather evidence of the conspiracy. Sarah Chen, the first victim. She was your sister," I said, suddenly understanding. "That's why you're really here." He nodded grimly. Sarah wasn't a traitor. She was an FBI informant who had infiltrated a real criminal organization. She was killed because she was about to expose the people who are really behind Operation Clean Sweep, a group of rogue federal agents who are using the cover of national security to eliminate anyone who threatens their own criminal enterprises. Asterisk. As we made our way through the underground tunnels, Agent Chen explained the true scope of the conspiracy I had stumbled into. "Operation Clean Sweep is real," he said, "but it's been compromised from the beginning. The original mission was to eliminate genuine threats to national security, but a group of corrupt agents saw an opportunity to use it for their own purposes." According to Chen, the rogue agents had been using the operation to eliminate witnesses who could testify against them, competitors in various criminal enterprises, and anyone who got too close to discovering their activities. "They've killed at least 30 people over the past 2 years, Chen continued, and only about half of them were actually involved in criminal activities. The rest were innocent people who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Like your sister," I said. Chen nodded. Sarah had discovered that several federal agents were taking bribes from the same criminal organizations they were supposed to be investigating. She was about to turn over evidence that would have exposed the entire network. When they killed her and made it look like she was the criminal, we emerged from the tunnels in a different part of the city, far from the warehouse where the confrontation had taken place. Chen led me to a safe house that he had prepared for exactly this situation. Inside, he showed me files and recordings that painted a picture of corruption that reached into the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "Who else knows about this?" I asked. "There are a few of us," Chen replied. "FBI agents, federal prosecutors, even some people in Congress who suspect that something is wrong but don't have enough evidence to act. We've been working together to gather proof, but it's been slow going because we don't know who we can trust." Asterisk. The evidence Chen showed me was overwhelming. Financial records showing unexplained deposits into the accounts of federal agents. Recordings of conversations where agents discussed eliminating problems rather than arresting them. Surveillance footage showing federal agents meeting with known criminals in secret locations. "This is enough to bring down the entire network," I said, studying the documents. "Why haven't you turned this over to the authorities?" Chen laughed bitterly. "Which authorities?" "The FBI director who approved Operation Clean Sweep in the first place. The federal prosecutors who have been covering up the murders. The Congressional Oversight Committee that includes 3 members who are taking bribes from the same criminal organizations." He was right. The corruption was so widespread that there was no clear path to justice through normal channels. "So what's the plan?" I asked. We go public, Chen replied. We turn over everything to investigative journalists, civil rights organizations, anyone who can get this information out to the public. Once it's in the open, the political pressure will force the government to act. It was a risky plan. Going public would make us targets for elimination, and there was no guarantee that the media would believe our story or that the public would care enough to demand action. But it was the only option we had. There's something else, Chen said, pulling out a final folder. We know who's really in charge of the rogue operation. It's not Captain Morrison or any of the local cops. It's Assistant Director Patricia Hawkins of the FBI. I had heard of Hawkins. She was a rising star in the Bureau, known for her tough stance on organized crime and terrorism. She had been mentioned as a possible candidate for FBI director when the current director retired. She's been using Operation Clean Sweep to eliminate her rivals within the Bureau and to protect her own criminal activities, Chen explained. She's been taking millions in bribes from international criminal organizations, while publicly advocating for stronger law enforcement measures. Our plan was simple in concept, but dangerous in execution. We would arrange a meeting with Hawkins under the pretense that I was willing to join the operation, and Chen would record the conversation while wearing a wire. The recording would provide the final piece of evidence needed to expose the entire conspiracy. Chen contacted Hawkins through encrypted channels, claiming that I had been convinced to join Operation Clean Sweep but wanted to meet with the person in charge before making a final commitment. Hawkins agreed to meet at a private airfield outside the city, where she often conducted sensitive business away from FBI headquarters. As we prepared for the meeting, Chen gave me a crash course in undercover work. The key is to seem interested, but not too eager, he explained. Ask questions that show you're taking this seriously, but don't push too hard for information. Let her do most of the talking. We arrived at the airfield an hour before the scheduled meeting to scout the location and set up surveillance equipment. The place was isolated, surrounded by empty fields and abandoned buildings, perfect for a clandestine meeting, but also perfect for an execution if things went wrong. Hawkins arrived exactly on time, accompanied by 2 agents who looked more like private military contractors than federal law enforcement officers. She was a small woman in her 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. Detective Rodriguez, she said, extending her hand. I've heard good things about your work on the Midnight Strangler case. Thank you, ma'am, I replied, trying to project the right mixture of respect and ambition. Agent Chen has explained the basics of Operation Clean Sweep to me, but I'd like to hear more about the mission directly from you. Hawkins smiled and gestured for me to walk with her toward a small hangar where we could talk privately. Chen followed at a distance, his recording equipment hidden beneath his jacket. Operation Clean Sweep represents the future of law enforcement, Hawkins began. We live in a world where traditional legal processes are too slow and too restrictive to deal with the threats we face. Sometimes, decisive action is required to protect national security and public safety. I understand the concept, I said, but I'm curious about the selection process for targets. How do you determine who poses a genuine threat? Hawkins stopped, walking, and looked at me carefully. That's an excellent question, Detective. The truth is, we've expanded our definition of threat beyond what most people would consider traditional national security concerns. We target anyone whose activities undermine the stability and security of our society: corrupt politicians, criminal financiers, even journalists who publish classified information. The admission was more than I had hoped for. She was essentially confessing to a program of political assassination carried out under the guise of national security. What about oversight? I asked. Who ensures that innocent people aren't targeted by mistake? Hawkins laughed. Innocent? Detective, in my experience, very few people are truly innocent. Everyone has secrets. Everyone has done things they're not proud of. We simply prioritize our targets based on the level of threat they pose and the likelihood that they can be eliminated without causing political complications. Chen was getting everything on tape, but I needed more. I needed her to admit to the financial corruption, to the personal motivations behind some of the killings. Agent Chen mentioned that the operation is self-funding, I said carefully. How does that work exactly? Hawkins' expression became more guarded. That's classified information, detective. If you join the operation, you'll be briefed on the financial aspects at the appropriate time. But I pressed on, knowing this might be my only chance to get a complete confession. I'm just trying to understand the scope of what I'd be getting involved in. Are we talking about government funding, private donations, or something else? Hawkins was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then she seemed to make a decision. Very well, since you're about to become part of the family, I'll be frank with you. Operation Clean Sweep is funded through asset forfeiture from our targets, contributions from grateful beneficiaries of our services, and yes, occasionally through arrangements with certain criminal organizations who find our services useful. There it was. The admission that they were essentially running a murder-for-hire operation disguised as a national security program. Criminal organizations, I asked, feigning curiosity rather than horror. Isn't that contradictory to our mission? Hawkins shook her head. Not at all. Sometimes the best way to control criminal activity is to work with the criminals themselves. We eliminate the ones who refuse to cooperate or who become too powerful, and we allow the others to operate within acceptable parameters. It's a more efficient system than the traditional approach of trying to arrest everyone. Chen was getting all of this on tape, but I could see that Hawkins was becoming suspicious of my questions. I needed to wrap this up before she realized what was happening. I have to say, this is more complex than I expected, I said. But I can see the logic behind it. When do I start? Hawkins smiled, but there was something cold in her expression. Actually, detective, I'm afraid your start date has been postponed. Indefinitely. Before I could react, the two agents who had accompanied Hawkins stepped out from behind the hangar, their weapons drawn and pointed at me. You see, Detective Rodriguez, Hawkins continued, we know exactly who Agent Chen really is, and we know that you've been working together to gather evidence against our operation. My heart sank. We had walked into a trap. Hawkins had known about Chen's true identity all along and had been feeding him false information while monitoring his activities. The question is, Hawkins said, what do we do with you now? We could simply eliminate you both and make it look like you were killed while trying to apprehend a dangerous fugitive. Or we could try to turn you into genuine assets for our operation. Chen stepped forward, his hands raised in surrender. The recording equipment, he said quietly. They probably have signal jammers. Nothing we've said here has been transmitted. Hawkins nodded. Very good, Agent Chen. You're learning. Yes, we've been blocking all electronic transmissions from this location. Your little recording session has been for nothing. But as she spoke, I noticed something she hadn't seen. In the distance, barely visible against the evening sky, was a small drone hovering over the airfield. Someone else was watching this meeting, someone who wasn't part of Hawkins' operation. You're wrong about one thing, I said, trying to keep her attention focused on me rather than the sky. This recording session hasn't been for nothing. It's been very educational. Hawkins frowned. What do you mean? I mean that we weren't the only ones recording this conversation, I said, pointing up at the drone. And I don't think your signal jammers work on military-grade surveillance equipment. Hawkins looked up and saw the drone, her face going pale, as she realized the implications. Who else is involved in this? She demanded, but before I could answer, the airfield was suddenly flooded with light as multiple helicopters appeared overhead. Federal agents in tactical gear rappelled down from the helicopters, surrounding our small group within seconds. But these weren't Hawkins' people. I could tell by the way they immediately trained their weapons on her and her two companions. Assistant Director Patricia Hawkins, came a voice over a loudspeaker. You are under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason against the United States of America. The lead agent who approached us was someone I didn't recognize. A tall man in his 40s with the bearing of a military officer. Agent David Chen, he said, you and Detective Rodriguez are safe now. We've been monitoring this operation for weeks, waiting for the right moment to move. Chen looked as surprised as I felt. Who are you? He asked. Special Agent Michael Torres, FBI Internal Affairs Division, the man replied. We've been investigating Assistant Director Hawkins and her associates for the past 6 months. Your undercover work provided crucial intelligence that helped us build our case. As Hawkins and her companions were led away in handcuffs, Torres explained that the FBI had become suspicious of Operation Clean Sweep when several agents reported irregularities in the program. The real Operation Clean Sweep was shut down 8 months ago, Torres said. What Hawkins was running was a completely unauthorized operation that she continued under the original name to provide cover for her criminal activities. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Over 40 federal agents, local police officers, prosecutors, and judges were arrested in connection with the rogue operation. The network had been responsible for at least 60 murders over a 3-year period, including several federal witnesses, investigative journalists, and political activists who had posed threats to various criminal enterprises. Captain Morrison, my commanding officer, was among those arrested.